Hello everyone, and if you are celebrating St. Patrick's Day today, happy St. Patrick's Day. I notice that we have someone joining us from Cork, Ireland. If you're writing or watching, from Ireland, pop us a note. We want to know you're watching. And this is a perfect day to make macaron. This is a live stream I've been planning for some time, and I'm really excited about it. Now, perhaps you already know that right here on the OEM channel, you can find my recipe for French method macaron. You can find my recipe for Italian method macaron. That's when I make the little spider macaron and decorate them up cutely. This is the latest macaron recipe I've been working on, and it is using the Swiss method. And I have to say, usually the one I'm working on most recently is always my favorite. This Swiss method macaron recipe has been my favorite for some time. Now, of course, I have to say a hello to everyone. Mom, Dad, meet you know. Hello, Bonnie down the street. Kathy, I know you're watching. Raph, you're probably watching. To regular viewers, I see you on the thread, and it is a pleasure to be here making Swiss method macaron. I have already seen a lot of your questions come in, and throughout this demonstration, I want to demystify macaron for you, because how can something with such simple ingredients be so challenging to make? And it's because it's all in the technique. I see the thread going nuts here. I'm going to try and get to as many questions as I can. And of course, you know that once we hit 500 likes, I'll be announcing when our next live stream is and what it will be that I'm making. And Hermione, you guessed it. But I'm not giving it away yet. So let's talk about Swiss method macaron. So a macaron is a simple little meringue-based cookie that, of course, looks beautiful. You can add coloring to it, and then any number of fillings can go in between to give it flavor and texture. So a well-made macaron shell is crispy on the outside, a little soft and chewy in the center, without a hollow center at all to it. There are lots of little finicky things when it comes to making macaron. A French method macaron means you're making your meringue like a French meringue, and that is simply whipping egg whites and sugar at room temperature and then folding in your ground almonds and icing sugar. Italian method macaron is like making an Italian meringue. You actually boil sugar to a soft thread stage, so 249 Fahrenheit. You pour it into your whipping egg whites to make an Italian meringue, and then you fold in your almonds into that. Now, the Swiss method, just like making a Swiss buttercream or a Swiss meringue, sits in the middle. So we're going to warm our egg whites with our sugar, but not boil the sugar syrup, then whip them, and then follow the same method. And I find this achieves, it's easier to read your macaron batter because it's all about getting through that macaronage to the right consistency that makes it easy to handle, easy to pipe, and gives you a macaron shell with a perfect foot. So the first thing we want to do, and the recipe, of course, is right below you, the complete recipe, including the French buttercream filling, if you'd like. First thing we need to make is Tant pour Tant. And this is so much for so much. It's basically equal parts ground almonds and icing sugar blitzed together. And this is a common ingredient in the French baking kitchen, not just, it's the foundation for a macaron shell, but it is also used in things like a streusel topping, a frangipan filling. So anything that has an equal part almond to sugar ratio, you use this. So what a lot of bakers do is they'll make a big batch, and they know they have that equal ratio of icing sugar to almonds, and then they can just dip in to measure out what they need, and it just saves a step in baking. So they're creating their own ingredients. I did see someone ask if you could create Tant pour Tant using hazelnuts instead of almonds. I believe you can, so long as they're blanched and peeled, not heavily roasted, because that toastingness releases oils and it will really overwhelm your macaron. But because hazelnuts and almonds have a comparable texture, you should be just fine. So I have my 125 grams of ground almonds And because we're blitzing this in a chopper or a food processor, a blender, whatever you have on hand that will work, you can finely grind the almonds. And the reason I like to do this with the icing sugar is the icing sugar absorbs some of the oils of the almonds. And so when you're folding this into your meringue, you have more control over its texture. It's not the almonds bringing down your macaron base. So I've got my 125 grams, but I added my extra 50 grams. You'll see in the recipe, it calls for 250 grams of Tant and an extra 50 grams of icing sugar. And that's just needed for this particular macaron recipe. You don't have to sift the ingredients before you blitz them. And I'll leave it up to you if you feel you have to sift them afterwards. I'm going to give this a few pulses, and I'll be scraping down the blender. This is just a mini chopper. They come in all sorts of forms. A regular food processor does the same thing. And you can really see it as we've got the wonderful Michael operating the cameras here. It's turning a little dusty, and I want to make sure I get into the bottom where the almonds are so that they mix through. You won't develop an almond paste, not with this quantity of icing sugar that will absorb all the oils. Oh, and hello to everyone from around the world. I see, it's great to see where everybody's watching from. Literally around the world. It's amazing. From Tennessee and North Carolina to Venezuela, the Philippines, and of course we can't forget Ireland today. I'll do one more pulse. Give it a little shake. Steve is asking a very good question. Can you use almond flour? Yes. Almond flour is comparable to ground almonds. It's more of a semantic thing. We tend to refer to them here in Canada as ground almonds. But almond flour can be, but isn't necessarily, a little bit finer. I still would want you to pulse your almonds and your almond flour and icing sugar together. Again, to give it a really good blend so that the machine is doing the work for you. And this is so fine and powdery now that I don't need to sift it. If you live in a more humid environment, you might want to sift just to make sure you don't have any big lumps. So I think we've covered the Tant pour Tant very, very well. Our likes are really creeping up nicely. I'm just gonna keep my work area clean. If you caught my live stream last week, I was tempering chocolate, and working tidily is very important. The same applies when you're making macaron. You don't want fat getting into your egg whites. You don't want excess moisture getting into your macaron shell batter. So taking the time to clean up is important. So now that we've got our base, it's time for the meringue. So I've got a pot at a gentle simmer now, and I'm using a metal bowl because it conducts the heat well. And I have my 100 grams of sugar. And if you're watching from North America, while a lot of our baking recipes are expressed in cups and teaspoons, when it comes to making a macaron shell particularly, weights are critical. You need that precision for these. The ingredients are so simple that the accuracy is part of the key to the success in making a macaron. So measuring in grams is a lot easier. I remember once, sorry, I just hit my mic. I remember once trying to calculate the equivalent in ounces, and you're dealing with such fractions of ounces that honestly, go for the grams every time. So I've got my 100 grams of granulated sugar, and even though it's about 4 large egg whites, the weight of an egg white, the volume per egg can vary. What's important is that you have 125 grams of egg whites. So if you measure your 4 egg whites and it comes out at 136, just use a teaspoon and pull away that extra 11 grams of egg whites. Again, precision is key, but it's just so planning, you know it takes about 4 large egg whites. So that goes into the mixture, into my bowl. And now here's something. I'm going to move over to my water bath and I'm going to whisk this, not to make the meringue in the bowl, but I'm going to dissolve the sugar into the egg whites and cook this up to 150 Fahrenheit or 65 Celsius. So you don't need to whisk this too vigorously, but you do need to whisk it constantly. And this will take about 3 to 4 minutes, which will allow me to chat a little bit about egg whites and aging egg whites. So that's quite often something you see called for, especially in French method, macaron. And it's mentioned so because an aged egg white, whether it's older eggs in their shell or egg whites that have been separated and then left either in the fridge or on the counter overnight to dry, is simply a little bit about, it's about evaporation. So over time, an egg loses moisture. And what we don't want in a macaron shell is excess moisture. So that's why a French method that is simply whipping egg whites and sugar calls quite often for the aged egg whites. The minute you start heating your egg, whether it's Italian method or this Swiss method, you're negating that need for an aged egg white because the heat is really bonding the sugar to the egg whites together. So you're going to get your volume, you're going to get your stability and structure absolutely fine. I'm just checking my temperature. I'm at 109 Fahrenheit. So kind of like when I was tempering chocolate last week, you want just a gentle heat, the steam. We're not trying to cook the egg whites, which is why we're going to stop at 150 or 65 Celsius. We don't want to cook the eggs. The sugar will protect them, but we don't need them to go higher than that. We're getting a little bit closer. And don't worry, I will stop and keep an eye on the questions. When you start making macaron, you know how it is, you gotta pay attention. So I don't wanna go over my temperature here, getting closer, 134. You won't see a lot of change. I'm starting to see some steam come up from them. And there we go, we've hit our temperature. So I'm gonna take this off the heat. And I don't want droplets of water to pour into my mixer, so I'm drying the bottom of my bowl. Hit the wrong button on my stove. And now immediately your egg whites go into your mixer and you want to mix them on high speed. Or you can use electric beaters, of course. So to finish my thought, once I get in process, I'll have time to take a lot of questions. There's so many little intricacies when it comes to making macaron. I want to make sure you're comfortable and clear with all of them. So now I'm going to be mixing the whites to a stiff peak. And this, it depends on the power of your beaters or your mixer. This can take 90 seconds or it can take about 3 minutes. And if it's a choice, don't worry, you're not making a buttercream. So don't worry if your egg whites are still warm. Once they hit a stiff peak, stop the mixer. It's okay if they're still warm. I'd rather you get the right peak than whip them until the room temperature and risk over whipping them. And you'll see they'll start getting glossier and hold their volume. I'm gonna take a look at your questions right now. Oh, good question. Wong Tok is asking, can I use egg white powder? I haven't done a good macaron shell solely with egg white powder, but it brings up a very good point. If you live in a humid climate, adding a half a teaspoon of egg white powder to your meringue when you're melting it, because it's concentrated, it's dehydrated egg white, it will intensify the power of the egg white and it will make it a little bit humidity resistant. I don't consider that a cheat. I consider that a tool to balance the weather because meringues are humidity sensitive. So just to repeat that again, if you live in a humid climate, you can add half a teaspoon of meringue powder or dried egg whites to make sure you've got that density in your meringue. We've got a nice stiff peak here. So now, what's interesting about making a macaron shell is that you're bringing up the egg whites to a stiff peak, and between folding in the Tant pour Tant and then the macaronage, you're actually bringing down the meringue. So the whole point is you are in charge of the meringue. So now I'm going to start adding my Tant pour Tant, that almond flour and icing sugar combination. I'm going to start with a third. And you can be quite gentle here, but remember, this is not a meringue that's going to be baked into a Pavlova or anything that has to hold its maximum volume. So you don't have to be too terribly gentle with it. There we go. And now this is the point where I like to start adding a little color, because with a few more folds, you have an opportunity to adjust your coloring a little bit. Seeing that it's St. Patrick's Day, I'm going with green. Now, what's interesting about a macaron is, especially if you're just starting making macaron or if you're struggling with it a little bit, don't try and add flavoring or extra ingredients to your macaron shell, because moisture is the enemy inside the shell. So using a concentrated color paste or gel works, or if you have access to a powder, that will give you a concentrated color, where the liquid colorings just add too much moisture to the macaron shell, and they tend to be a little weak, so you don't get that intensity. So I'll continue working in that color as I add another third of the Tant pour Tant. Now, Neat is asking a very good question. Can we use Aquafaba in place of the egg whites? I have never tested it. I don't know that you would fully get the foot, the beautiful foot at the end of the macaron shell, but you should get a beautiful meringue cookie that would hold and bake just like a macaron, because it's amazing how it does behave. And by doing the method the same, by heating the Aquafaba with the sugar to get it to melt, you don't have to hit 150, you just need to get it to dissolve the sugar. It should work, but like I said, you probably won't get the foot because it is a completely different ingredient. The rest of the Tant pour Tant is going in. I've been working on some other recipes that feature the Tant pour Tant, so don't be surprised if you see this term come up again, because if I'm going to make it for one recipe, well, I'd like to use it in multiple places. That's what it's designed for. So now, oh, thank you, Michael, for the overhead cam, because I want you to see right now that I've folded in the dry ingredients, you can see that the batter is thick. It's not terribly glossy. And now we're going to want to see a side angle, Michael. When I lift it up and drop it, see how thick it is? It's just about to glop. That is not the time to start using this batter to pipe your macaron. So this is the step, the macaronage, where all you have to do is stir, but now what you're doing is breaking down that meringue a little bit. And the oils from the almond flour are going to work a little bit and help dissolve. So the sugar's dissolving, the almond flour fat is getting into the meringue, and it softens it up. So almost like creaming butter and sugar together when you're starting a cookie recipe. You want to smear the batter against the side of your bowl, and then fold and pull from the bottom again and smear. Can I turn this more? Yeah, you're catching the action. And now let's see. Already we're seeing a difference. So it's not glopping, but what we're looking for is a smooth sheet running off your spatula, and then you know you're there. So just 2 or 3 more times around the bowl, give it a stir from the bottom to make sure everything's incorporated, and then try it again. We're getting closer. It's starting to move, it's starting to run, it's getting a little glossier. Spread, spread, and then fold from the bottom. I think a mistake that often happens during the macaronage is people spend so much time smearing the batter on top of the bowl, they forget to get to the batter at the bottom. And so you'll have half your batter, which is perfectly macaronaged, and then the base bottom is actually still too thick and heavy. So that folding at the end is important. We are so close. So just 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is probably what we need. Nope, just one more. The macaron batter is the boss. And let's try this now. There we go. We've got a nice line from the spatula straight down into the batter. It's not coming off in chunks. It's smooth. And then, interestingly, a little tip that I came up with by accident, and it's simply because of I like to clean as I go, that I got to my perfect point of my macaron batter, and then I went to take care of some dishes for just about 90 seconds, 2 minutes. And I found that was a game changer for me. Letting the batter rest a little bit in the bowl before you get it to the piping bag just ensures that everything is kind of settling into place. So you don't have to rush at this point. I'm just going to take I'll use that 90 seconds to look at your questions. Oh, Teresa Kennedy, happy St. Patrick's Day from Ireland. We've got, oh good, and we've got a comment from Trinidad. Very humid, but finds the Swiss Method Macaron batter really, really works. Okay, so I've got, oh, here's a good question. Ahmad, hello, is asking, is the egg white powder also applied to Pavlova? Yes. Anywhere where you would like a crisp meringue or a meringue to hold its crunchy outside, to use a little bit of egg white powder in the meringue really does help it along. Before you start anything, you definitely want to have your trays prepped and ready. You can pipe macaron onto parchment paper. It's absolutely fine. Using silicone baking mats is a lot easier. Now I have a silicone mat with a Macaron template on it. You can buy them anywhere. You can also trace your own circles onto parchment paper, but this recipe makes, you'll end up piping almost 3 trays on this batter. Don't trace 3 sheets of parchment paper with all that circle. You'll be there half the day. You want to be making macaron. So what you want to do is trace 1 circle and leave a bit of extra parchment hanging out, and then you put it underneath, just like I have. I don't have 3 templates with macaron shell, so you just put the template underneath your silicone mat or your parchment and keep going from there. I've got my piping bag with a 1/2 inch plain tip already set to go, and I've made a little dam so that the batter doesn't leak out the bottom as I'm filling it. Oh, Brian, you're asking about my macaron template. This is a prototype, so I'm hoping it will launch soon, but right now it's not available yet. So I'm actually testing it out just to make sure the sizing and the durability holds up. So that's a very good question to ask. And happy St. Patrick's Day from Missouri. Hello, Kelly. That's a good Irish name. So we're getting our batter into the piping bag. If you want, you can put the bag into a pitcher so that you can use 2 hands to fill it. Whatever gets it easiest from the bowl to the piping bag. And now we're just about ready to pipe. I'm going to just get this out of the way. The key when piping macaron is to hold the piping bag 90 degrees, completely upright on top of your baking tray, because if you pipe at an angle, there's an unseen curve you're actually giving each macaron, and you'd be surprised that even though they look circular as you pipe them, when they bake in the oven, it may just sort of stretch out a little bit. And if you're going for the Easter egg effect, that's awesome. But if you're not, you likely want a perfectly round macaron shell. Oh, and I see we're getting close to 500. We've got 468 likes. If you're just signing on now, I'm making Swiss Method Macaron. You give me up to 500 likes and I'll announce what I will be making during the next live stream, because we are not done yet. Oh, Trinity is asking, how big are the circles on the template? They're 1.5 inches. I can't remember what that is in metric. 2.5, 3.75 centimeters. All the instructions and specific details, including the size of the piping tips, is below in the recipe, so you can find everything out. All right. Oh, I like AJ has one of the silicone mats with the impressions on it, so that way it holds the batter inside the shell. So now I'm going to start piping, and once I start, I can't stop. And I'm holding the piping bag into the macaron batter. Not too high above it. And then you can kind of feel the spread. It barely takes any pressure. There we go. Now I've got the first couple, I always get a couple little drips, but then figure it out. We're having a nice sunny day in Southern Ontario, so I saw, Michael, you just opened the door. So now I'm going to grab, there it is. I just have a jar to set my piping bag in upright. Now I need to slide out the template. Ta-ta-ta. And you want to give your baking tray just a little tap, so if there are any large air bubbles in the macaron, nothing too severe. They'll pop out and break on the surface, and then you want to set your tray aside to let those shells cure. And it is a little bit, this is where practice makes perfect. You sometimes have to make the batter once to get a sense of it, to know what sort of time, depending on your climate, how much time you need to let these cure. I find with a Swiss Method recipe, it takes 45 minutes to an hour. Talking and piping is tricky. I'm almost there. Tap, and I'll just finish off with the remaining batter. Oh, we are well over the 500, so now I can let you know, we'll get every last bit ready. I can get one more, I need an even number. So for the next live stream, I will be making, Hermione, you guessed it early on, hot cross buns. We're gearing up to the Easter season here, so I thought that would be a nice recipe to show. I have a particular method for making hot cross buns that I really enjoy. I don't make them overly sweet, but it's that combination of dried fruit, citrus peel, and spices that make hot cross buns so delicious. So I'll be making that in 2 weeks. So I won't be back next week. I'll be back in 2 weeks. I totally forget what the date is. Whatever 2 weeks today, or same time, same channel, I will be here. Now, fortunately for you, let me just actually show you, if you get little side drips on your macaron tray, it just happens. Just make sure they're not touching. You can just take a little cloth or a Q-tip. You don't want them touching the shell itself, because that could interfere with the development of the foot. So now you set these aside, not near a pot of boiling water or a humid space. If you can set them aside, I usually put them in the dining room because it's just they sit on my table, no one touches them. And you want to let them cure for 45 minutes to an hour. And you check the doneness simply by touching them. And you can tell when they've dried enough. And I have some that I made at, let's see, exactly an hour ago. So they should be ready. And actually, let's do the comparison so you can see the difference. Exact same recipe. This was made an hour earlier, and you can see how the macarons have lost that glossy shine. And when I touch on the surface, try and touch it on the side so you don't damage it, that it's not sticky or tacky at all. So the meringue has actually dried just on the surface, and that tells you that you're going to get that beautiful satiny top to your macaron. The things that can go wrong with a macaron shell, and someone asked this before we started the live stream, that you'll see you develop a crack right in the middle. That is a humidity issue. That either moisture got into your meringue batter or that it's really, really humid outside. So then the meringue just has so much energy, it pushes through the center of the macaron. It could also be a sign that your egg whites were over whipped. So they've got so much volume and they bake for such a short time that they push through the center. The other problem that happens quite often with macaron shell is you get a hollow center. So it bakes up beautifully, you get the satin top, you get the gorgeous foot, that ruffle around the bottom, and then you crack inside of it and the shell collapses because there's no filling in the center. And that is a sign of oven temperature variance. It's either running too hot or conversely, it could be running too low. So your meringue, either your meringue shells bake quickly on the outside before the inside has had a chance to set, or they bake so slowly that the meringue itself collapses as it's baking, so it develops that shell. It's also another sign, over whipping your egg whites or concurrently not enough macaronage can also lead to that. Don't throw them away. If you see there's only a little bit of space, when you assemble your macaron with the filling, which has moisture to it, and then you let them mature in the fridge, and this is usually a good idea to let your macaron mature in the fridge once they're assembled. The moisture from that filling can actually plump up the center of those macarons quite nicely. So keep that in mind. All these little tips are what count in terms of, oh, someone just said crackeron. Yeah, I like that, Claudette, when you mess up your macaron. I'm gonna pop these in a 325 oven. This oven, I'm erring on the side of under 10 degrees less Fahrenheit, only because, you know, I get talking to you and I might miss 30 seconds. But I'm gonna set the timer for 10 minutes, check them, and then they may need another 2 to 3 minutes after that. I'm also gonna be sneaky and pop in a little white chocolate. Okay, so these are ready to go, and this is the part of today's live stream I am most nervous about because I just, fingers crossed, still, even after so many years of making macaron, something can happen. And I commend people, I have seen people make macaron in cooking competitions under pressure of the clock and do it successfully. I don't know that I can handle that stress. This is enough stress for me today. So while those are baking, and of course I have some magic of television ones made already and cooled because they do take a while to cool, let's talk about making use of the yolks from separating the eggs. And so a French buttercream filling is a classic for a macaron. Of course, you can use a ganache. You might have noticed the picture that held this reserve screen. I even made a gelée-filled macaron that I have to say was really, really tasty. You've got lots of options for fillings. Instead of making the custard, and you'll see the full recipes beneath. So a French buttercream is a custard-based buttercream. While we were following the meringue method for the macaron shell, This is a lovely recipe because it makes use of the yolks. So you cook 2 yolks with a little bit of milk, a little bit of sugar until thickened. And it's such a small amount. I went ahead and I did it just so that it could cool to room temperature. And if we want to show this, Michael, just so you can see what it looks like. So it's thicker than a creme anglaise. And it has no flavoring added to it at this point. That way you have total control. So with one batch of buttercream, once you've added the butter, you can break it into little sections and change your flavoring as you wish. Isabel, you're asking for subtitles in Spanish. Well, the good news is that once this live stream goes and is posted on the channel, you can choose the subtitle option to watch this in Spanish afterwards. So if you're missing some of these key points now, hopefully you'll follow back and join later. This is so great having everybody weigh in. This is a great opportunity. While the macarons are baking, before I add my butter here, we've got lots of questions and comments. Oh, interesting. Concave center to a macaron. I don't know that it's the silicone baking mat that would cause that, because try a sheet of parchment the next time you make macaron and see if it's still happening. Then you know it's the recipe, which, oh, concave. That, I wonder, usually I see them crack, blow up, and that might be a case of over macaronage, that they just have lost their structure. That's a very good point. Something I'm going to explore and research a little bit. And yes, macarons can stick to parchment paper a little easier than they do silicone baking mat. The key I am about to show you is getting, whether it's parchment or silicone, get that base, the parchment or silicone mat, off the hot baking tray onto a cooling rack, because that's where the condensation builds up. If you let them cool on the hot tray, they'll develop condensation and then they become sticky and hard to remove, silicone or parchment paper. So pulling them, and it takes tough fingers or a pot holder to lift and slide the tray away in order to let them cool. Okay, so let's get on to this buttercream, because I still have 6 minutes before we're checking our macaron. They're doing okay right now. Don't be scared. If you're staring at your macaron through the oven door, the foot, this is the drama of the macaron. The foot often does not develop until the last 4 to 5 minutes. So long as you see the cracking on the top happens right away, within minutes of them going into the oven. I've got nice smooth tops to my macaron now, so I'm doing okay. But the feet haven't developed yet. I'm adding my butter to the mixer, and I'm going to use a whip attachment so I can, like any good buttercream, you want to whip some air and volume into it. So I'm going to soften the butter first. I'm quickly going to grab, oh, I can see some feet developing. Whoop. I don't want to let all the heat out. I'll talk about this white chocolate in just a second. I know this table's shaking a little bit. I hope you'll bear with me. It's not a lot of butter. You can make French buttercream ahead of time and freeze it if you wish. You just have to soften it and re-whip it before you use it. So if you want to double up on the recipe, this is enough to make one batch, enough buttercream for this full batch of macaron. But if you're making more, you double up and away you go. So now I'm going to add first a little of this custard. And don't worry if you see this buttercream split. Ideally, you want to use your custard base at room temperature or just a few degrees warmer. And same with your butter. And if you see it curdle, it just takes time. Keep whipping it and it will come together. Now I'll add A little more. This is a small recipe, so 125 grams of butter. That's half a cup, or the equivalent of 1 stick. I saw that question just pop up. All right. Now this is where you've got some creative control and flavor. If you want to make a chocolate buttercream, add an ounce of melted dark chocolate. I love the texture of adding white chocolate to this French buttercream. So while it's not in the recipe below, I highly recommend adding 2 ounces or 60 grams of melted white chocolate. So I just made use of my warm oven and popped it into the oven. And that really makes a super silky filling that's relatively neutral in taste, but that hint of chocolate is just there, and oh, it's really kind of nice. And I find it smooths out the buttercream beautifully. I want to fluff it up just one last time, and now I'm going to add my flavoring. So a little vanilla, of course, and with the white chocolate, I already made a batch actually with coconut flavoring, but I'm going to add, because the green macaron, some peppermint extract, so just a little bit. So we've got the white chocolate mint, which will be like a vanilla mint or vanilla cream. You know those cream candies that are so good? Do you remember those, Michael? They're kind of the things I think your grandmother used to buy and put in a candy dish, but they're at the same time, they were kind of tasty. So give that a second to fluff up. Oh, minute and a half. I'll get this into my piping bag. So another comparable tip, it could be a little smaller, doesn't matter, but a plain tip. We'll get the buttercream loaded in there. Don't worry, I'm not piping this into the hot macarons that are coming out of the oven. Oh, Rajesh, an eggless macaron recipe. That is such a challenge. I should look into that. I'll admit I don't have one with me now. Eggs are so much an important part. We were talking about using Aquafaba, but I think I would have to play with it because honestly, going eggless with this recipe is not about making a one-to-one substitution. I think we'd have to look at completely redesigning the whole recipe to make it work. So you've given me a project, let me get to work on it. Good. I'm glad. Abiding on the straight and narrow path, I'm glad you could join me today. My pleasure, too, to have you. We've got a good viewership today. 600 watching right now. That's impressive. Well, thank you. And I know you're watching from around the world. We're up to 663 likes. Can we hit 750? The oven says yes. Oh, yes, these are coming along well. They're looking dry on the surface, which is what I want. So I'm just seeing if they can be, no, they need another 2 minutes. And I'll tell you what I was looking for there. So what I like to do to check the doneness is to lift up the silicone. You're never gonna be able to lift a macaron from the tray flat, being that hot, it's so fragile. But I lift up the silicone mat and I peel it down, and if I can see it's coming away from the bottom of the shell, then I know it's done. Because as I said, if you underbake your shells, that center that's not cooked will collapse a little bit. A delicious result in a chocolate chip cookie for a chewy center, not something we want in our macaron. And the center of a macaron will still always have that moisture. And this is where the Swiss Method recipe really helps that, because we've melted the sugar into the meringue. That's giving it lots of moisture. I am going to bring over the shells and I'll start piping, but then I'll set it aside so I can show you the ones coming out of the oven. So here is the exact same recipe I baked yesterday, and there is that beautiful foot. And you want it to be even and level. This is where piping straight down really counts. We've got a smooth, satiny finish. And then now it's time to fill. Oh, I didn't color my filling at all. I could have made it green if I wanted to. I think the yellow is going to look nice. And similar to how you piped your macaron shell batter, this is actually the easy part. You pipe your filling, and you never want to sandwich your macaron top to bottom because you'll break that beautiful top shell. Is hold it by its side, and there you go. Now, and I should point out, you'll notice I didn't put any decor sprinkles or garnishes or accents on the macaron shell when I piped them. If you want to decorate the outside of your macaron shell, drizzle with chocolate, add sprinkles, you want to do that after your macaron shells have dried. Now it's time to show you the macaron. Here we go. You saw it happen. You saw those go in, and here they are coming out. So the trick is to prevent them from sticking to the parchment paper, get them right off the hot tray immediately. I'm going to do the same with my last tray here. Whew, hot on the thumbs. This was a trick I picked up from my dear friend, Chef Philippe Corbière. I mentioned him last week during the Tempering Chocolate live stream. If you missed that, you should check it out. It is right here on the channel. He was an amazing chocolatier and pastry chef, and he studied at Le Notre. He apprenticed at Le Notre in Paris. And he explained the technique they have in the back of their kitchens is they have sinks on an angle, and he said what they would do was the trays of macaron shells would come out of the oven, they would put the tray down these angled sinks and run cold water between the parchment paper and the tray to cool down the shells quickly. So unless you have a custom-made macaron sink, and I don't have one, just getting them off the tray is really all you need. And you need to let them cool completely. Don't try and remove them when they're still warm because they still will be a little bit sticky and you'll find the bottom will stick to the bottom of the tray a little bit. So away these go. Back to filling our pretty little macaron shells. I think I've covered off a lot of major points here. Oh, hello, Anita from Taiwan. It's great to see everybody joining me at all different times from where you are, all different locations. You know what? I need to do assembly line. I can't do one at a time. So line up your shells, and even though there might be infinitesimal differences in size, some may be slightly larger. You do these enough, you can freehand. You don't even need the template. But if you haven't been making them lately, then you need a little practice. So now I can pipe faster. And if you're filling with ganache, you want to make sure it's cooled enough so it has a comparable texture. A whipped ganache makes a great filling. And I would love to hear, now we have 2 more live stream themes already picked out. As you know, I'll be back with hot cross buns in 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks after that, I have another recipe in mind, but I'd love to hear, and perhaps we'll do a survey out on the channel. We've got Rob moderating today. Whoop! Oh, now that's a sturdy macaron. It didn't even crack. What you would like to see me make during a live stream, because I am always open to your suggestions. This is why this channel works. I'm here for you. And I love sharing videos, and Michael and I have a new project underway, so we'll have more pre-taped content coming your way. But in the meantime, the live streams really keep me engaged and help me with the recipes that I want to develop to share with you. What do you think about a number cake? I've been looking into that and playing with that idea lately. Do you want to see me make have I done choux paste profiteroles or eclairs? Maybe a choux paste would be a good demonstration. Oh, hi T, I see you there. Oh, a molded mousse cake. Ooh, I just picked up some pretty little silicone cake molds. I am a big fan of a mirror glaze, and I don't think, have I done a mirror glaze on a live stream? It would take a little time planning. I could do it in a few parts. So I could do the entremet as one class and then do the mirror glaze the next day. There's a thought. So glad we're talking about this. Oh, and hello, Shanzi from Pakistan and Borneo. That's amazing. And you were making macaron today, and they came out lopsided. Oh, but they had great feet, except for one side. You know what that is? Oh, that's a great point. When I was talking about piping straight down, and it's not just piping straight down. When you lift your piping bag away, you don't want to do it at an angle. So you want to come down at 90 degrees, lift up at 90 degrees. That little lopsided foot, it's either that, or if you have a fan in your oven, it can potentially blow your macaron and push it a little lopsided. So I hope that helps. We've got lots of points. Oh, Karen's asking a question. How long do the macaron keep for? Well, they keep in the fridge. I find they're fine for about 5 to 6 days. I have frozen them, assembled, and they're okay. I know commercial bakeries do that a lot. They make them ahead and freeze them. But I'd say 5-7 days as a peak, because after a while the humidity, these are so delicate and airy, the humidity will get to them after a while. So that's a great question to ask. An orange mousse cake. Ooh, I like that idea. I love chocolate and orange together. So there we go. We have had a successful macaron making session using the Swiss method. So now this channel has all three. If you want to compare, check out the French. Those are my citrus macaron. Then you've got the Italian method, which are the little spider macaron. And now we've got Swiss method macaron, which I have to say right now are my absolute favorite. So wishing you a wonderful St. Patrick's Day, happy baking this weekend and moving forward. I would love to hear about your results using this recipe because this will be posted up on the channel in just probably in under an hour. So once you've made your macaron, please let me know how they turn out, and I'll keep an eye on this thread and see if you have any further questions. Thank you so much. Oh, one last great question from Ahmad. Do you have to pipe all the batter? Yes, you do. You cannot let it sit or reuse it. It is a use fresh only. Oh, those finicky macaron method tips. But it's all about getting to this beautiful result. And I know you can do it. I really do. This is why I love sharing. I believe in you. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I know these should chill, but. Do you want to zoom in quickly? Can you, one last, because there's no hollow. How's that? Oh, I can taste the mint. Great. I think I'll finish that. Bye. Terima kasih. This is Masarap.